By the winter of 1945, Germany was finished, or at least it looked that way. Hitler was trapped in his bunker in Berlin. The Wehrmacht was retreating on every front, and Allied troops had crossed the Rhine. For civilians in London, New York, and Moscow, the end of the war felt close. But then came a question that still haunts history. If the war was almost over, why did the Allies keep bombing German cities into rubble? Cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Dresden burned in February and March 1945, long after it was clear Germany could not win. Thousands of civilians died in raids that seemed less about victory and more about vengeance. To understand why, we have to look back at the Allied bombing strategy. By 1942, Britain's Royal Air Force, under Air Marshal Arthur "Bomber" Harris, had adopted area bombing. Instead of striking only military targets, the RAF deliberately bombed entire cities at night, aiming to crush German morale and destroy its ability to fight. The United States Army Air Forces, meanwhile, focused on daylight precision raids against factories, oil plants, and transport hubs. By late 1944, these strategies had merged into one relentless campaign. The logic was simple but brutal. If Germany's cities were reduced to ashes, its people would stop fighting. Its industry would collapse, and its leaders would have no choice but to surrender. But there was another reason the bombing never stopped. Allied leaders feared that Nazi Germany, even in its death throes, could mount a desperate last stand. National redoubts in the Bavarian Alps, where die-hard SS troops and Nazi officials might retreat to wage a guerrilla war. Whether this threat was real or not, the Allies weren't willing to take chances. Bombing cities and infrastructure across Germany was meant to prevent regrouping, destroy supply routes, and ensure there would be no miracle comeback. It's easy to think that Germany had stopped fighting by early 1945, but the reality was darker. Despite Allied advances, Germany was still producing weapons: jet fighters, V-2 rockets, and U-boats. Many factories had been moved underground or dispersed to smaller towns, making them harder to target. Cities like Dresden, Leipzig, and Berlin weren't just cultural centers, they were also transport hubs for troops and equipment. To Allied commanders, bombing these cities wasn't senseless destruction, it was finishing the job. Every train line destroyed, every munitions depot hit, was one less resource for the German army. By January 1945, Germany's defeat was inevitable, but the Allies chose to keep bombing, not just to crush the last of Hitler's war machine, but to send a message. There would be no mercy, no safe haven, no possibility of escape. Cities would burn until the Reich surrendered unconditionally. For the civilians still trapped inside, that message came not as words, but as fire from the sky. On the night of February 13, 1945, the city of Dresden became one of the most infamous targets of the war. Known as the Florence on the Elbe, Dresden was famous for its Baroque architecture, museums, and culture. At the time, it was also crammed with hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing the Soviet advance. The British Royal Air Force struck first with waves of bombers, dropping high explosive charges to rip open buildings and expose them to fire. Hours later, the US Army Air Forces followed with daylight raids. The result was a firestorm so intense it created hurricane-force winds, pulling oxygen from the air and suffocating thousands before flames consumed entire neighborhoods. The death toll remains debated. Some estimates say 25,000, others much higher, but the scale of destruction shocked the world. Entire blocks were reduced to ashes in a single night. To the Allies, Dresden wasn't just a cultural jewel, it was a critical transport hub. Rail lines through the city connected German forces retreating from the Eastern Front to those still fighting in the West. Its factories, though not the largest in Germany, still contributed to the Nazi war machine. But historians argue there was another layer. Dresden's bombing symbolized the Allies' determination to crush any hope left in the German population. By showing that even a city once considered safe could be annihilated overnight, the Allies hoped to break morale once and for all. By early 1945, bombing was no longer only about destroying military targets, it was about sending a message. Allied leaders wanted ordinary Germans to feel that resistance was futile, that no city was beyond reach, and that the war would only end in unconditional surrender. The timing was no coincidence either. The Dresden raids took place just as Allied leaders Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met at the Yalta Conference. Some historians believe the bombing was also meant as a signal to the Soviet Union, proof of Allied air power capable of devastating entire cities in days. Even as the bombs fell, questions arose. American and British officers wondered aloud if such destruction was necessary when Germany was already collapsing. Neutral nations like Switzerland and Sweden criticized the raids. And in post-war Germany, Dresden became a rallying cry for those who viewed the bombing campaign as excessive, even criminal. Still, for Allied commanders in 1945, the answer was simple. Dresden was part of a strategy to end the war as quickly as possible. Whether it was military necessity, revenge, or psychological warfare, the result was the same: one of history's most devastating bombing raids. For the people trapped inside Germany's cities in 1945, the bombings were nothing short of apocalyptic. Families huddled in cellars as entire neighborhoods collapsed above them. Survivors described the roar of firestorms that sucked the air from their lungs, leaving some to suffocate before the flames reached them. Others remembered carrying the charred remains of loved ones in buckets or burying neighbors in mass graves. Even those who lived often wished they hadn't. Children were orphaned overnight. Parents left to wander the ruins searching for missing sons and daughters. In cities like Dresden and Hamburg, the sheer scale of destruction blurred the line between the living and the dead. The city itself became a graveyard. As soon as the war ended, the bombings became one of the most hotly debated strategies in the conflict. Supporters argued that the raids shortened the war, saving countless Allied and Soviet lives by preventing prolonged German resistance. They saw the destruction as a grim necessity. Total war demanded total measures. But critics saw it differently. To them, the late war bombing campaigns were excessive, even criminal. Cities like Dresden, packed with refugees and cultural landmarks, had little direct military value. The killing of tens of thousands of civilians in the war's final months looked less like strategy and more like vengeance. Even in Britain, where Bomber Command had carried out many of the raids, the legacy was complicated. Air Marshal Bomber Harris, who had championed the strategy of area bombing, was never granted the honors given to other Allied commanders. The shadow of Dresden lingered over his reputation. There's another layer often overlooked. The bombings, particularly in early 1945, weren't just aimed at breaking German morale. They were also a demonstration to the world, especially to the Soviet Union. At Yalta and beyond, the Allies knew they were shaping the post-war border. The firestorms over Dresden, Leipzig, and Berlin were a chilling reminder of Western air power. Some historians argue that these bombings were an early step in the psychological chess game of the Cold War. Today, the cemeteries and memorials across Germany tell the story of those nights of fire. Dresden's Frauenkirche, once reduced to rubble, has been rebuilt stone by stone, standing as both a monument and a warning. In Hamburg, memorials and the ruins of churches remind visitors of the tens of thousands who died in a single firestorm. For Germans, the memory of the bombings remains painful, a reminder of both their nation's aggression and its own suffering. For the Allies, the raids are remembered as part of the desperate push to end history's deadliest war. So why did the Allies bomb German cities even at the very end? The reasons were military, psychological, and political all at once. But for the civilians trapped beneath the firestorms, the reasons mattered little. What they lived through was devastation beyond imagination, proof that in total war, victory can come at a cost almost too high to bear. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.